Hi, thanks for joining me and welcome back to the channel. So today's video is one I've been looking forward to doing for quite a while and certainly have talked about before now, which is quite a rarity that I'll be discussing videos that are forthcoming. But anyway, it is finally here, the Analogue Productions Atlantic 75th anniversary release of Yes's 1972 classic album Close to the Edge. Now I must say, I mentioned this before, if you'd like to check out, there's a video up, I'll put a link to up here and down in the description. But just a few months ago I compared, not this one because I didn't have it, but I compared this, which was released earlier this year, 2025, and this is the Super Deluxe or Definitive Edition. I think it was given a few different monikers, but it's basically, it's a very nicely, lavishly presented 5 CD Blu-ray and an LP release. It's got a nice booklet, the cover's all very nice, there's quite a few outtakes and extras. Part of the main reason for me getting this was discs 4 and 5 of the CDs was the Live at the Rainbow concert from the 16th of December 1972, which is actually pretty good. And what hadn't been released at this point in time was that same concert released on vinyl, which again I've featured in a video, put a link to that one here as well. And that was a real disappointment, and frankly, if you really want to hear that concert, I would frankly get this over the vinyl. But it's, you know, whether you need that if you've got Close to the Edge or one of those Progeny albums, I can't really say. Not really a highly recommended record. The vinyl LP recut by Bernie Grunman is okay at best, and the CD versions are similarly okay at best. Okay, but it's there, and I featured it previously. What I compared that to in that video was my UK original, 1972 UK original, which I'll come back to, and I think this is 82, it might have been 84, but the MoFi version. And this is actually, of these 4, this is the one I've had the longest. I got the I had a UK, I say original, but it would have been a, you know, a repress for a few years. Got this, which is supremely quiet vinyl, it's lovely in that respect. And then I went out and finally got hold of a proper UK original, and this one is the definitive one, there's no question. This is the one to beat, and that, for that reason, that is what I'm comparing today. I'm comparing the Analogue Productions Atlantic 75th anniversary 2 LP 45 RPM cut from the original master tapes with the original, obviously cut from the original master tapes. Okay, so let's just let's get back to talking about this new Analogue Productions Atlantic 75th release. Okay, so as is common with this whole series, they're all 45 RPM, so cut on 2 pieces of vinyl. There is I think there's maybe only the one 4 LP set, which is the Genesis Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which is, you know, a lovely thing. Anyway, I'll show you what you get. So we've got a textured cover, which is, I'll say it's nice, but I will point out that it's actually not the correct texture. I don't know if you can see this, but it's a very uniform, each kind of like cell, if you like, is possibly a millimetre across. It's like a very sort of even textured cover, and I'll just hold that closer to the camera just in the hope that you can see that. Now, the original, which is also a textured cover, I don't know, again, it's not, it's a more subtly textured cover, but it's definitely, it's kind of got like creases. It is much more like a leather. This is kind of like a sort of I don't know, a lizard skin kind of thing almost. It's Yes, it's textured, but sadly the texture is the wrong texture. Okay, it's a minor thing. It's a nice solid cover. It's numbered, and as with the original, you've got this image here inside the gatefold, and with the original, the inner sleeve is also a lyric sheet, and I will just amongst the various sort of marketing inserts, you get this, which is obviously you know, the lyrics replicating the inner sleeve of the original. Okay, now the very massive elephant in the room here, and this is the first of any of the Atlantic 75th series that I've got that this applies to, and that is the fact that it's 45 RPM. We have to turn the record over halfway through the, you know, the title track, Close to the Edge. And where that comes, if we look at the lyric sheet here, Close to the Edge, as anyone who knows this will know, opens up with sort of bird song and a sort of a mountain stream kind of noise. Then it goes into the solid time of change, the opening section, which goes into total mass retain, and then at the end of total mass retain, you sort of get this sort of almost orchestral, sort of spacious. It very much reminds me of the crossover between side 1 and side 2 of Jethro Tull's Thick as a Brick, actually. The way it sort of, the music sort of fades out, but it doesn't completely fade out on the original, and then fades back in. It's sort of a spacious, almost architectural kind of abstract kind of soundstage. And, you know, so it fits as, I mean, it's the obvious place to make that change in this record. And it's not, you know, it's not that horrible. If this was how it was released in the first place, just like with Thick as a Brick, Jethro Tull's Thick as a Brick, you know, you'd suck it up and live with it, and that's all there is. Because the original and all subsequent reissues and CDs and all the rest of it don't have that, it just flows from, you know, the sort of the fade out, if you like, of total mass retain into the fade into I Get Up, I Get Down. It's just, it's one of those things, and the only reason it is there is so that this could be cut at 45 RPM. And the reason they've cut it at 45 RPM is to give you that maximized, I say maximized, they could have cut it at 78 and put it on 4 discs. But, you know, in reality, that maximized fidelity and sort of seeing into the soundstage, seeing into the recording session. And really that's the essence of this review, and it's the essence of this conclusion, the conclusion that I'll come to about this record. So you've kind of just, you just simply have to accept that fact that, you know, you have to change sides halfway through a song. And I know there's enough people, I get enough comments from people who just absolutely abhor 45 RPM records. They cannot deal with the breaking of the flow and getting up and turning it over. Now, for all you guys, you know, if you're watching this, maybe you're a glutton for punishment, maybe you just like to sort of watch it to wind yourself up and then have a go. But this is a biggie in that respect. If that bugs you, just forget this entirely. But what does this offer? Why would you consider getting this? Okay, and that's a really interesting point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about putting this record on without immediately having played the original. I mean, I've played both back to back, this first, then the original first, then this, several times all week, so I've got a good feel for where the differences lie. Okay, now the first thing is, my original is far from quiet vinyl. So when you put the record on, there is a distinct sort of vinyl raw kind of, you know, sort of an opacity to the soundstage, if you like. When you put this one on, I mean, actually it had me fooled at first, because I thought, are there noises there that I hadn't noticed before? Now, the background of this is so quiet that I was hearing sort of rumbles and things coming from my system, if you like, that I'd not really been aware before. You know, it's not to say my system's bad, but this is, you know, if you really turn the volume up high and then put this on, you know, you'll probably hear the noise floor of your turntable above the noise floor of the record. That's what I'm saying, okay? It is supremely quiet, which of course the original isn't, okay? So that's one thing to bear in mind. Now, as we start playing Close to the Edge, and I'm going to talk about the title track more, because, you know, that's the epic, and it's the one that goes over two sides, so that's the one there where the real negativity, if you like, hits. So you put it on from the opening, and you've got that, you know, tremendous clarity of the bird song, and the sort of the rivers, you know, the stream, if you like, trickling along, and then the keyboards come in, and then a little bit, you know, a minute or so in, then the guitar and the bass sort of come in, and the whole thing kicks off. And it's at that moment, you know, at the first you're just aware of this clarity, which is really quite startlingly good, you know, in the opening with the bird song, etc., because there is no sort of, you know, there is a noise floor, but it's vanishingly low, okay? And vanishingly low is a good description of the noise floor of this, because you'll hear other things that you haven't heard before because of it. Now, in terms of the instruments, the music, there's, whether you go for, you know, I've talked about the Mo-Fi, I've talked about the, you know, the Stephen Wilson remix and the Bernie Grumman repress, and all sorts of different remixes and represses. And when you get these things, there's normally some sort of like timbral kind of alteration, which is unpleasant. You know, the keyboards might be harsh, or the drums might be harsh and clipped, or the cymbals clipped, or the vocal might be a bit squawky and forced, or veiled, or muggy, or thick and heavy. With this, there is none of that. Okay, now I will make some observations. I think the first thing that kind of really strikes you is that the bass guitar, Chris Squire's amazing and wonderful bass guitar, if anything, is less prominent, it's less weighty, it's less thick, and it's less sort of in your face. And that's a double-edged sword, okay, but it is supremely clear. And there's, you know, there's sort of bits where he sort of like, sort of almost plays sort of backward rising notes, or you know, you just hear everything. And that's very pleasant, but it does sort of, it is sort of losing just a little bit of weight and drive, I would say, the bass guitar, okay? But it's got more texture, more clarity, and more agility to it. Now, I've picked that out sort of first because that's probably the weakest area of this, okay? Now, if we talk about what I'd say the strongest areas, or the first things that leap out at you as like, wow, that sounds amazing. I'd say the first thing is Howe's guitar, because right from the beginning where it kind of cuts in, on the original, the guitar's quite sort of, well, the guitar and the keyboards combined, they sort of overlap each other, and it gets a little bit messy, a little bit sort of squawky, or a little bit oversaturated, which kind of gives the impression of loudness and sort of drama, if you like. But they remain supremely clean and transparent, and you really, really feel like you're listening to the master tape. You're listening in there, and the feel of how, you know, every single note or chord on the guitar is just explicitly kind of laid out in front of you. You can just hear what his fingers, what his hands are doing, better than I've heard before. And another thing that's supremely great about this is the feel of Bruford. Now, along with Chris Squire's bass, I would say the drums are a little bit sort of thinner, Okay, so on the original, I would say the drums kind of sound nicer, as in the same way as I would say on the original the bass guitar sounds nicer, but that's in a slightly opaque, slightly thicker, slightly more weighty kind of way. But in terms of the detail and the ultimate sort of insight you get into it, and the handling, the speed, the touch, the sort of, you know, that sort of deft touch of Bruford on when he's doing his little sort of drum fills from left to right, and it's just spellbinding. Now, on the original, those are spellbinding too, but it's very much part of this overall big flow. On here, it's much more sort of just, you know, as I say, the noise floor is so low here, you really do feel like you're in the studio. And that's quite something. And for someone who absolutely loves the album, it's you know, you'll play it and you'll play it again and you'll play it again and you're like, wow, you know, just, and I've had to play this several times, maybe 4 times before making this video, because it's sort of, you know, at first you're sort of bowled over by what you've not noticed before. And then you have to go back and, oh yeah, you can just about detect those things in the original, but they're not so obvious. And then you go back and you sort of enjoy that further, that deeper insight again from the Analogue Productions Atlantic 75th. So we've got Howe's feel, you know, the feel of what he's doing is just sublime here, and the same with Bruford, but the bass is not quite as forward, and I'd say that's the sort of the overriding thing of the first couple of minutes. And then the voices start, okay, and what's very apparent there is you've got more clarity on John's voice, more expression, more timbre. You can hear his accent better, you know, his Lancashire accent. You can hear all the little sort of inflections and you know, sort of lifts and dips and swings, and it's you know, again, it's like Howe's feel, like Bruford's feel. You feel closer to Anderson too, and you are just sort of, you know, you almost be listening forward and like, wow, you know, wow. So it's awesome, right? But then you've got, as we get to the chorus, you've got Anderson's vocal and you've got the 2 backing vocals, or at least 2 backing vocals. But I think it's Howe on the left and Squire on the right. I'm not totally sure, but I think it's Howe and Squire. Now you can hear them as separate entities on the original. There's no question of that. But the overall thing is slightly sort of thick on the original, whereas on here again, it is definitely clearer and more, you know, just the layering and the separation between the backing vocals, and it's very much, you've got a backing vocal on the left, a backing vocal on the right, and Anderson in the middle, and it is just, you know, it's sublime. It really is. Okay. And then as the song goes on, you know, the sort of the speed, if you like, the feel of the drums, you realise this is just absolutely exemplary. And then again, as you sort of get further into the music, there's a bit more organ, and some of the organ on here is actually a church organ, and you've got that sort of that fat sort of weight of the sort of electric keyboards, but you've also got the incredibly wonderful natural timbre of the church organ. And there's a real sense of when Rick presses an organ key down, and you just are really aware of that sort of, it's much more apparent later on when the organ really gets going, but you're really aware of the sort of the mechanics of a proper acoustic church organ, and it just sounds so much more real, and again, so because of that, you've got, you know, the increased Howe feel, you've got the increased Bruford feel, you've got the increased Anderson feel, and you've got the increased Wakeman feel. Okay, now again, I'll come back to the bass. You've got more dexterity and speed and a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful bass playing of Squire. You've got that, but it doesn't quite have the sort of the fat, sort of grungy, dirty weight that I think we all know from Squire. So, you know, really, we're getting to the end of side one of this at this point in time, but it's definitely like an eye-opener and a jaw-dropper. You will be, you know, if you know the music, you will be sat there kind of agog listening to it, just like, wow. And then we get to that sort of fade-out space, and as I say, the noise floor on this is vanishingly low. So you've kind of got this, you know, deep, wide soundstage, and it sort of fades out as we get to the point where we've reached the end of side one. Okay. Now, obviously, you know, it's only about 10 minutes into the song, and you're sort of like, oh, okay, here we are. This is where they put it in. It's sort of, and as I said, really reminds me of the changeover on Thick as a Brick. But you just have to jump up and you turn over, and then it sort of fades back in, and then we get into, where are we? I get up, I get down, which of course is, you know, the last lyrics of the Total Mass Retain. So it sort of fades back in, and you're, you know, there's no question you've broken your flow, you've kind of broken your concentration. But, you know, In Her White Lace, the vocal starts in, you know, within like about a minute of the start of the side. And again, by that point in time, it's just, you know, the layering of Squire's howls, Anderson's voices, the timbre of them. You know, you are really drawn in, and, you know, your eyes are wide open again and your jaws dropped open. And it is, the vocal separation is superb. And it's not separation achieved by sort of fiddling with the EQ and making things sound a bit spiky and a bit harsh or a bit gritty. It is just sweet as a nut, absolutely silky clarity. It's just beautiful, okay? And the spaciousness is wonderful. You see, you know, you've got those three voices singing away. It's absolutely beautiful. And then we've got the church organ starts to kind of come in for real, so to speak. And again, the timbre of that church organ is just mind-boggling. It's just, as I said earlier, you've got the sort of, you've got the, you know, I don't know, it's left hand or whether it's bass pedals with the organ. I'm not a church organist. It's probably pedals and, you know, both hands. I don't know, but anyway, you've got the bass notes, and you've just, you know, again, it's you just get the sensation of like a valve has been opened and air's rushing into this huge pipe, and the notes there, and then when you stop, the note stops, and the melody is just, again, every note, every finger press and stop is just as it should be. It really, really, really is. It's wonderful. Okay, and then we've got go into Seasons of Man, and again, it's just it's, you know, it's the final section. It's very, very clear. There are things in here that I've noticed. There's a piano in there, which if you listen for hard, it's definitely there, but it's very clearly there. You can just, and that's what I mean about the clarity. You're sitting there and you can hear better what the band is doing. If this is your favorite band and this is your favorite album, you'll just be hearing it closer and more like you've just stepped into a time machine and gone back to the studio recording session. It's wonderful, absolutely eye-opening and wonderful and fantastic. Okay, so that's the Atlantic 75th anniversary pressing from Analogue Productions. Okay, now if we then play the original, how does it compare? So, as I've already mentioned, the noise floor the noise floor on this, you know, the Analogue Productions pressing is better than any of them. It's better than anything. It's better than the Mo-Fi. Significantly better than the original. It's just stunning. Now, as soon as the the music kind of kicks in quite sort of frenetically at the start on the original, you'll get the, you've definitely got the impression the bass is fuller and more there, and really the bass is kind of sort of the driving thing. But it's not more detailed and it's not more transparent. It just has a bit more sort of Wellian weight to it, okay? The drums, again, I've mentioned, you don't quite get the sort of the absolutely explicit sort of feel and sort of deftness of touch of Bruford, but there's a slightly more weighty sound to the drums. Now, I definitely prefer Bruford to Alan White as if we're ranking Yes drummers. But on this original pressing, it's harder to tell the difference, and I think with this one, what you really are hearing is that absolute just that deftness of touch of Bruford. It's just sublime and so sort of light, if you like. It's the speed of the groove, the rhythms, the swing is just phenomenal. So whilst the bass and the drums have got more weight here, they haven't got more kind of swing and agility and like ninja-like sort of, ninja-like agility, let's say. I would say there is more urgency and more drama in this, and I think that's really, it's come from that slight sort of thickening and adding a little bit more meat to the bass and the drums. And this is where, you really get to appreciate what the Atlantic 75th Analogue Productions version's doing, is the guitar and the keyboards, there's nowhere near the clarity and the insight that you get on the Analogue Productions version. Nowhere near. They get a little bit sort of messy, a little bit sort of oversaturated, if you like. This has got more of a golden glow to it, the original, whereas the Atlantic 75th Analogue Productions has more of a kind of a silver transparency, if you like. Okay. And this golden glow does sort of, it warms it up. It adds a bit more sort of, there's a bit more weight and a little bit more drama and maybe a little bit more urgency. But, the vocals are softer, more rounded, slightly diffuse. The backing vocals aren't as clearly delineated. There's more density to the vocal sort of trio, if you like. Whereas here there's, on the Analogue Productions, there's a definite sort of separation between them and interplay. The organ and the guitar really do sort of meld into a slightly oversaturated sort of glow on the original. I mean, I would say far more than they do on this. They just don't on the Analogue Productions. They really don't. And so it's, it's a mixed bag. I mentioned the piano on Seasons of Man, I think, which really sort of, it was almost like I hadn't heard it before as a separate entity. And when you know it's there, yeah, you can hear it on this, but it's really buried in the mix. It's hardly apparent as its own thing. So it's more of a part of a whole. And I think that really kind of sums the two of them up. Okay, so the original, obviously it's 33 RPM and you don't have to turn it over in the middle of side one. So that's a massive, massive benefit to it. But it's I mean, the album is staggeringly good. It's one of the best prog rock, one of the best albums ever made. Simple as that, in my opinion. It's absolutely beautiful, absolutely stunningly beautiful. The Analogue Productions Atlantic 75th anniversary takes that and it just removes a few decades and a few veils and a few levels away, levels of detachment away from the studio setting. And it makes you feel like you really are in that studio listening to maybe the unmastered, you know, because mastering is something that happens after the recording studio, obviously. So you really feel that you're in there, and you can see and feel the musicians doing their thing significantly better than you can on the original. What we've talked about so far really is Close to the Edge, side 1. Now side 2, And You and I, and Siberian Cartreau, phenomenal songs, and again, it's, you know, anyone who knows the original album will know them. Absolutely phenomenal songs. Now the thing is, of course, they are both half a side long each. So on here, they are one side long each. So the, you know, changing of sides between the two is, to me, of no consequence. Okay, sonically you get exactly the same thing. So with the, you know, the sort of the drama, the sense of weight, slightly more on the original, maybe, you know, that warmth, that golden weight and warmth. But in terms of the, you know, the real sense of touch, you know, Rick's fingers on the keyboard, Steve's fingers on the guitar, Bill's fingers on the drumsticks, you know, the way he's just dancing around the kit like a, you know, like a ninja fairy. It's staggering. And of course John's voice, it's, you know, it's never sounded as good. It really hasn't. It's beautiful. So yeah, we talked about Close to the Edge mostly because, you know, that's the one we've got to, you know, that's the downer, if you like. So, you know, sides 3 and 4 of this, And You and I, and Siberian Cartreau, are just staggering. But the overall whole, the overall mastered, if you like, whole, of course I prefer the original. It's, you know, there's no way I would suggest anyone who goes out and buys this would then go and sell their original or sell their repressing of the original or whatever they had before. You need to have this as a 33 RPM or a CD or an SACD or some sort of form. You need to have this where you can play side 1 all the way through as it's intended. But if you love that, you know, so in that respect, you know, I'm never going to get rid of this original. But as someone who absolutely loves it, do I welcome that extra insight and that sort of that journey closer, you know, cutting through 50 years and cutting through many generations? You almost feel, like I say, you've cut through the vinyl pressing, the vinyl cutting, and even possibly the mastering stage to a much more in the studio sensation. I, for one, think that is worth every penny of the $60. It doesn't matter that it's not my only copy. It doesn't matter that it's not going to be the one I listen to every time, because if I want to listen to, just sit back and listen to the whole album, I'll put the 33 on. Of course I will. But if I want to just really hear those musicians at their best in the recording studio, laying down Close to the Edge, then I'll turn to the Atlantic 75th Analogue Productions pressing. It's staggeringly kind of vividly there. Of course, you know, if it was different, you know, what would it take to make me want to replace the original? Well, it would have to be 33 RPM and on one disc for starters. And that would probably mean that you just wouldn't get that extra in the studio-ness. And if I would want some of that slight extra weight and warmth back to the bass and the drums, just to sort of flesh out the drama, if you like, a little bit of it. Now, if you did that, would you then just sort of bury this thing into a, you know, a more mediocre version like what Bernie pressed, not, you know, earlier this year? I don't know. I think you probably might. So, you know, my advice is you need, you know, well, my advice is you need 2 copies of this. You need an original, and you need the Atlantic 75th Analogue Productions double 45 RPM Kevin Gray cut version. Unless, of course, you don't like 45 RPM records jumping up and changing sides, because if you don't, this will drive you absolutely, utterly insane. Okay? So on that note, I will say thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye for now. Bye.